Us online. Do we have clarity? All right, good. My name's Frank Gray. I'm with Castle Rock EDC. I want to just thank the folks that brought this event together. Pam Riddler, where's Pam? She was there right there. Thank you for your partnership in bringing this event together. And Kevin Tilson, Downtown Alliance, thanks for being one of our sponsors for this event. I have to give Kevin a lot of credit in this event because Kevin was the one that suggested that we put this together after having seen Elizabeth present in the past. It's always super, super interesting data. And I'll tell you the special skill that Elizabeth has, and that is she takes all this great data and processes it into something that normal people can actually, understand. And keeps it very lively and keeps it relevant to what's going on in the world right now. So I'm going to get out of the way and get Elizabeth Garner up here, so our state demographer. So Elizabeth, take it away. Thank you so much for being here in Castle Rock, and let's give her a warm round of applause.
All right, I'm testing. Is that good for you? All right, perfect. Well, thanks. I'm so excited to be back. It's been since 2019, and I will tell you that I shouldn't only come down here when I'm invited to. I should come here more often, and especially when we have guests in town from like out of town or out of country or anything like that, because I think like your main street is like almost like quintessential, like coming in. But I will tell you that I didn't recognize it when I came in. You guys have done some building, I think. So it looks amazing, and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you guys very much. Let's make sure it goes. Maybe? Where should I point it to? Maybe I need to turn it on? No, it's on.
We're having some audio issues online as well, so we'll make sure to get you connected. Thank you. Sorry.
I can also just hit a button if that's easier.
Sure can. Just advance it here.
Just to hit the enter?
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. Now we're doubling up.
Perfect.
There we go.
Great. So again, thanks for having me here. And so one of the key takeaways that I want you guys to see from this presentation is that really in the short run, like 2 years, we are expecting some pretty fast growth. A lot of that is going to be very recovery oriented and kind of stimulus oriented. And then on the complete other hand, long-term slowdown. So it's going to feel weird because you're going to hear a lot of me talking about slowdowns, and you're like, no, we're on fire. And that's the two balances that I want you to see, is that really very short run, 2 years-ish, we should expect some very fast recovery and growth, but long run, there are some headwinds out there that I think is really important to be aware of, just so that we keep everything balanced. I also want to bring in kind of pre and post COVID. Where were we pre-COVID and pre all this stuff? Am I having problems? Okay. Do I want to take that off completely? Oh, you are so fine. Okay. All right. So, couple of the big things out there is that the population was growing at a slowing rate. Pre-COVID, nothing to do with COVID, growing at a slowing rate. Jobs were growing, but also slowing in that growth, all pre-COVID. Aging, every day, day older. We keep doing it, but we're getting a lot more older people simply because we've got a lot of baby boomers. A lot of people born in that 46 to 64-year-old years time frame. And I'm going to tell you, Douglas County as a whole will experience this actually faster than almost any other county in the metro area, because all of these boomers and then Xers wanted to be in Douglas County, and they're here. And they're aging, and you might look around and you might say, no, we're not getting old. It's like, friend, look in the mirror, because yes, we are getting older. and it's just us. And that's fine. This is what we're supposed to do. Also looking at migration slowing and Colorado's competitiveness within that concept and where we fit. Am I still good? Okay. And then we're becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, and especially at our youngest ages. So this was all going on pre-COVID. The other exciting piece is, hopefully everybody heard in the news, today we're getting the census data. Of course, not early enough in the morning to where I could have actually told you anything. It's coming out at 11 o'clock, but this is actually earlier than we thought. It was supposed to come out on Monday, next Monday, the 16th. And so, of course, they let us know this last Monday that it was coming out on Thursday. And I'm like, wow! So it was nice. It was exciting. So coming out at 11 a.m. today, there's the link there. You can just also Google census data release. Not that every single one of you won't be at your computers trying to listen to that. We're only getting a smidgen of the data. So total population, 18 and older, by race and ethnicity, total housing units, group quarter population, so like prisons, universities, nursing homes, and that's it. That's it. That's all we get today. But it's going to be our first piece of information to see how big really is Douglas County, how much has it grown from 2010 to 2020, and then where does Castle Rock fit into that whole big picture and all of the other pieces. So that's very exciting news for today. So I am going to talk a little bit about 2020 data and know that this is draft information. This is not the Census 2020 count. It's what we think we're going to get to. But we do have the state numbers for 2020. They released those back in April. So this is what I mean by we've got this dichotomy going on. Between 2019 and 2020, the U.S. experienced the slowest growth rate that they have on record since they started collecting population data. Okay, so that's one end of what we're looking at. And the way it works out is Colorado is part of the United States. And so whatever's happening to the U.S. will also impact Colorado. And then, of course, Douglas County is part of Colorado. Castle Rock is part of Douglas County. So whatever is happening nationally will also impact Colorado. So between 2019 and 2020, the U.S. increased by 1.1 million. It was a 0.35 annual average growth rate, and 16 states lost population. That's the largest number on record losing population since the United States started collecting data. So very interesting other component. Colorado ranked 12th in its growth rate, reached about 5.8 million at 0.85 annual average growth rate. Just back in 2015, we were the second fastest growing state. So we've gone from second to 12th. So not only have we slowed down, we've also slowed down relative to other states. Ninth in total growth, increasing by about 49,000 folks. A lot of you might think, wow, 49,000, darn it, they're all on the highway. Texas increased by 340,000. 340,000. And we increased by almost 50,000. Now, yes, I agree. Texas is a bigger state. I understand that. But it is important to see that. And this is the slowest growth rate for Colorado since the 80s. And we can look at a graph of it. This starts in 1970. The blue is natural increase, so births minus deaths. The red is net migration, the ins minus the outs. And so we can see how that's fluctuated over time. Certainly the 90s, if anybody remembers the 90s, they will remember. That was when Colorado was experiencing incredible growth. It was over 3% per year. That's also when Douglas County was exploding, was during that time frame. And really where we've seen recently, and especially this last decade, it has been average growth. It has actually been below average growth. So whenever the newspapers were saying, oh, Colorado's exploding, I'm like, no, they're not. Okay, they weren't looking at the information. People just right? Media loves to make big statements. But it wasn't true. But we can also see how everything has started to slow down, both natural increase as well as net migration. And if we look across the state, and this is just by county through 19, all of the red, orange, yellow counties are counties that have increased in population. All of the shades of blue have declined. So again, we are one of the faster growing states. We do have one of the better economies, but we've got about a third of our counties declining in population. So that also has an impact on the state in terms of where we are, because pieces are growing and pieces aren't. And I will tell you a little bit about the story in terms of why we're seeing it all along the Front Range as I go through this. Really boring 3 lines, those births, deaths, net migration. Red is the deaths, blue is the births. We can see that the births have slowed down. We can see the deaths have increased. That's normal. That's what's been happening. The green is net migration. And the reason I bring this in here is because so many times people blame the net migration. They're like, oh, those people from California. I'm like, yeah, actually, we're having more babies than migrants. So do you hate babies? And of course, people don't hate babies, right? But this helps them with that perspective, is that really a larger share of our growth is really coming from babies. But, right, they don't drive. They don't buy homes. They're just part of the family. And so they don't have that impact that you think about like a migrant does. But you can see that net migration has been falling as well as births. And this is one piece that I think is really important for Douglas County and Castle Rock, because I think Castle Rock really caters to families, is that we've seen this big decline in births. Not only in Colorado, but also in the United States. And if anybody asks me, like, what surprised you, Elizabeth? I will tell you it's the slowdown in births. We have more women of childbearing age now than we did in 2007, yet we've got about 8,000 fewer births per year in Colorado and about 525,000 fewer births in the U.S. But we've got more women of childbearing age. Huge slowdown in births. And what is the impact of this? Well, fewer kids in K-12, fewer people spending money at, and that's why I had that Toys R Us in there, fewer people then entering higher ed, fewer people entering the labor force. So this does have a long-run impact on our really ability to fill positions. Now, our peak birth was in 2007. How old does that make them? 14, 15-ish, right? And so we know that that's our peak person, not only in Colorado, but also in the United States. K-12 has already been looking at this. Higher ed is panicked. They are already looking at how do we widen, the pool of folks that can come to higher ed. Because again, we've seen this slowdown. If we look across the country, the pink shaded states are experiencing an absolute decline in children or in people under the age of 18. All of the shades of green still have an increase. So you'll see that the increase is really to the west and to the south. This also mirrors where we've seen net migration in the country. The states with the green also tend to have a positive net in migration. So why do I bring this up? Those pink-colored states are going to become incredibly competitive with Colorado. And you'll see that pink California is there as well. Where does higher ed get a lot of their students? California. Absolute decline in people under the age of 18. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how Colorado competes for talent when we see an absolute decline in people under the age of 18. Now, I told somebody, I was like, yeah, I've got adult children. That's kind of maybe an exaggeration. They're 21 and 23, so adult is questionable. Both of them wooed out of the state to go to college out of state. Lower tuition, potentially better schools as well. Why do they look at our kids? You tell me. Potential future labor force. You get a high school student to go to my son goes to Indiana. Go to Indiana. He has all of his internships are in Indiana. Where do his job offers come from? Indiana and or Illinois, ton from Illinois. We've got to keep an eye on our kids and know where they're going and know that this is one of the competitive issues that I think we'll have in the future. So if we look at Douglas County, we can see the same picture going on. Huge growth in the 90s, definitely has slowed down through 2020. So again, the blue is natural increase, the births minus deaths, the red is net migration. And I would say fairly average and kind of what we expected for Douglas County through the 2010s, although actually even a little bit stronger than we had anticipated. I think especially the last 2 or 3 years. What is our forecast? Again, we can see maybe, we'll see if that works. No. We can see the peak birth kind of been 2007, huge slowdown in births in Douglas County. We're expecting those to increase, but I circled it because I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. We just don't know what our women are going to do. And I won't say just women. I mean, there's a family decision typically with that. But I think it's an uncertainty because we're just not sure what people are going to do. And it's across the board. A lot of it is really positive. The largest decline in our births have been for teen parents. So that's huge positive. But it also is through the 20s, all the way through 30. Understandable. Increase in birth rate to women over the age of 30. Positive as well. Although then the question is labor force, pieces like that. When I bring this up at a lot of events, people are like, yeah, no, that decline in teen pregnancy, great, but you know what? I just don't trust the world right now, so I'm not going to have a kid. So that's another side of it as well. It's not just teen pregnancies. It's concern about the world. It's also concern about the labor force, concern about higher child care, all of those other pieces in there. So that's why I think that there's some uncertainty. But those deaths, let's see if I can go backwards. Those deaths, pretty certain. we keep dying like we always have. So no changes on that end. You can see kind of that little blip right there that we had for COVID, definitely an increase in deaths due to COVID, but then expected to go back on trajectory. If we look within Douglas County, what are some of the changes? And so these are draft July 2020 estimates. So again, you're going to see numbers today and you're going to like, nope, that's not what Elizabeth said. And it's like, I know that that's not. So they will be different, but this is ish. I don't think Douglas County is going to come out that different than what we're anticipating. This is a July number. The numbers that you're going to see today are April numbers because we end up doing over then the rest of the decade. It's all based on July. So kind of anticipating a change within Douglas County of about 73,000. I think it'll be anywhere between 70 and 75. You can see everywhere else. Highlighted there, Castle Rock, certainly a large increase over the decade, 45%. So really every other place except for that kind of Aurora part. And that's just dealing with the very small numbers. We can see that definitely those increases, really largest for this Castle Rock area, except for that unincorporated in terms of absolute numbers. Interesting, Castle Rock ended up in the top 20 fastest growing municipalities, over 50,000 in the nation for both 2018 and 2019, and is the fastest growing municipality in the state over the size of 50,000. So definitely, and I can see where you put them all on Main Street. But we can see that increase here. So the other piece, instead of births and deaths, is this idea of net migration. So the ins minus the outs. Who do we usually attract? We attract youngins. Really, that 22 to 37 is our bread and butter of the types of people that we attract to the state. The blue is at kind of the bump right there is at 65. We get a little bit of in at 65. You can see we're slightly positive. 65 plus. but we're not like any kind of a Florida or an Arizona. The reason I bring this up is that I'll talk a little bit more in the future about the fastest growing age group in Colorado and really in the country is 65 plus. So knowing that if we attract or retain 65 plus is important to know on how fast we're going to grow in the future. So keep this in mind, is that Colorado is not really a big location driver for that 65 plus. In net, there are some communities, like for example, if we look at Larimer County, tends to bring people in. Mesa County tends to bring people in. So everybody's got a different age distribution for that. So this is Douglas County. So and you could look at this and you're like, yep, that's what we do. You really attract basically that 30-something. And it really starts at it's really that 40-something is that goal area. We'll be able to create a new one of these as soon as the census data comes out, actually next year, where we'll get the single year of age data. But again, you don't get a ton of net in-migration either for that 65 plus. Typically what you do is you attract that 30-something, and then they just age in place. And I know you have a lot of 50-somethings because it was really the Gen X that, Douglas County was their goal. That was their mission in life, is I'm moving to Douglas County. And they all did. And so you've got a lot of 50-somethings here. But we can see that you lose those 20-somethings. And this is Douglas County as a whole. I think a lot of that was housing. So it'll be fun to see what that looks like this next decade, because I think Douglas County as a whole has been doing things to attract more younger adults. But you can kind of see that pattern. Where do they come from? So this is showing the net migration to Douglas County as a whole from different areas. So the red, orange, or the kind of the orangish colors are the donor places. And where they're coming from, and the blue is who you're losing people to. Definitely we can see that within the state as a whole, that tends to be the largest kind of connection, but we can see that there's connections from all over, and tend to lose folks. Interesting, to El Paso. Come on, guys. Really? No, I love all our counties. I just love teasing them. You can see also Larimer County in there. I think that's actually a lot of your students might be going up to CSU. Arizona, come on. Can't lose to Arizona. But then we can see Elbert, Oklahoma, Weld County, Texas, Boulder, all of those areas where we're losing people to from Douglas County. But then where are they coming from? A lot of other Denver metro counties. So we've got the Jefferson, Denver, Arapahoe coming in those top three in terms of where people are moving from. Again, like I said, like when I was growing up and I grew up in Denver, it was everybody's mission in life was to come here. So we're still seeing that taking place. But then we can also see some other areas in terms of the coasts. We see Virginia, New Jersey, man, no. And then also coming in from the California side as well. Why do people typically move to a location? It really is very much job driven. When we see stronger job growth, we tend to see more net migration. So the blue bars are job growth, the red line is net migration. And we've seen this pattern over time. And I will tell you, this seems to dumbfuddle folks in the Front Range. Because I'll talk to people and say, this is kind of our forecast. They're like, Elizabeth, I don't like people. I don't want any more. And I'm like, okay. So what do you think about jobs? And they're like, jobs are awesome. Bring us more jobs. And it's a lot of economic development groups that are very pro-job, but then they're not so fans on people. And I'm like, but let's think about this. A job is a person. And a housing unit is where that job sleeps at night. So don't we have to love them both if we're going to love them, So we need to make sure that we're doing this, that when we're thinking about job growth, that we're also thinking about where we're going to put the people. We can see a couple of things on here. One, for that 2020 bit, you can see that huge decline. It was previously it was closer to that 2015 number. So in the matter of just a couple of months due to COVID, we lost 300,000 jobs. And so that did bring that average down for that 2020. So we can see it down, but then we see this spike back up through 2025. And that's simply looking at that recovery from what we've lost through where we're going. But then you can see that downward slide out into the future. Really talking about our forecast in the long run is to see this downward pressure. Why? We're forecasting slower growth in the population in the United States. That means there's fewer people to fill jobs. That means employment will slow down simply because we don't have as many people and we've got this aging population. That will also then put downward pressure on net migration. Why do I bring this up? When we look at that relationship between jobs and population, the red, orange, yellow counties are the counties that were pre-COVID back to pre-recession peak levels of employment. So they were back to where they were in about 2008, so the other recession. All of the shades of blue are counties that were already below the other recession before we went into the COVID recession. So these are areas that were already struggling with job growth previously. What you'll notice is that this looks so similar to the map of where we've seen population growth. So we've seen it along the Front Range. It's where we've seen population growth. Why? Because this is where we've seen job growth, has been along the Front Range. The other piece that comes into there is in that commuting piece. And I know that Douglas County has been a huge piece of that commuting in terms of really looking at the number of workers versus the number of jobs in county, and that it's been looking definitely at trying to create more jobs in county to kind of create that balance. But Douglas has been kind of a labor shed for the rest of the Denver metro area, especially the South metro area, with definitely more workers, 164,000. And this is old data. This is 2018. That's the most current that they've got on in this tool, compared to 121,000 jobs. So there is this mismatch. So definitely people were leaving. But over time, what we've seen is that actually between in that last 10 years that Douglas County has been able to increase the number of people that live and work in county from 34% to 40%. So that's a nice increase. And that's good to see because I think people like to see less commuting. Now, Castle Rock, again, is an interesting condition, and we were kind of chatting ahead of time. The light green circle are the workers, so the entire light green circle are your workers. The dark green circle are your jobs. Where they cover each other, where they hit each other, is where they both live and work, for example, in Castle Rock. So we can see that you do have some people that live and work in Castle Rock, but really the largest share don't. They are coming in from, they leave this area and work outside. Likewise, people come outside to fill those jobs in. And unfortunately, we've not really seen a change in the last 3 years. Between 15 and 18, it's stayed about the same. Now, most of the work that you've done on housing has occurred since then. So this hasn't picked up that change yet. But just to kind of show you that there are pieces of information out there. And housing really is an issue in the state, obviously. And I didn't include the housing slides in this deck simply due to time. But one of the challenges that people have been talking about is affordable housing. And they kind of almost blame the people on it. You know, they're like, oh, it's all those migrants. Point is, we were creating about 60,000 housing units a year in the state, all the way through about 2007, 2008. And then guess what it shrank to in like 2010? 10,000. And how long did we stay at 10,000? All the way through like 2013. So it's really not, again, I'd like to put blame where it's due. It's not on the people. I mean, people have been creating households forever. We've seen this like for hundreds of years. People form households that need housing. But we stopped building housing units in the state. from 60,000 to 10,000 for about 5 years. Yet we were still creating people. I mean, I've got these kids, they leave your house, they start new houses. Everybody does that, right? And we were doing that, but not creating new housing. And that's really what's put a lot of pressure on housing units. So it's good to see that you guys were creating some housing units. So again, talking about what kind of jobs, though, were growing over this time frame, over this last before COVID. Health services, professional technical services, accommodations, food service, transportation, warehousing, state government. What are most of those jobs? They're service jobs. What do service jobs do? They provide services to people. Where are all of the people? In the Front Range. So we were creating kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy over this last decade of creating more jobs where the people are, because really we're growing service jobs. And then we needed more jobs where the people were, and then we needed more people where the jobs were, and then we needed more jobs where the people were. And we keep doing that. And so that's why we've seen this growth along the Front Range, because we've been growing service jobs. What was the number one job? Do you remember? It was just 30 seconds ago. There we go, health services. So many people are saying, yeah, no, we're going to change this in the future. And I'm like, all right, so health services is your number one growing industry, and our fastest growing age group is 65 plus. You really think we're going to stop growing health service jobs? No. We're going to keep growing health service jobs. So do you think we're still going to be growing jobs along the Front Range? Absolutely. Third one, accommodations, food service. So eating out and drinking. Now, definitely COVID has an impact here. However, if we look at consumer expenditures for older adults, what is the second largest area that older adults spend their dollars? Accommodations, food service. There's a blue light special for a reason, right? So simply because of who we are is why we've been growing these jobs. Yet you talk to some folks and they're like, yeah, no, we're going to change this. And I'm like, you're going to ship grandma out? No. We're still going to be creating these jobs because of who we are. So be ready for it. Now, can some of that change? Professional technical services, huge piece for Douglas County, as well as the Denver metro area. Can some of that be done more remotely? Absolutely. So that is an area that can be leveraged maybe. But again, all of the other pieces, unlikely. Transportation and warehousing. Are you going to put a transportation hub in the middle of I-70 West around around Grand Junction or around Glenwood Springs? Heck no. I-70 is a little scary, especially on the west side. You're going to keep that in the Denver metro area, and especially, for example, on the I-70 corridor around the airport. That's where those jobs are going to be. If we look at Douglas County, number one, retail trade, very closely second by professional and technical services, health services, financial activities, accommodations, food service in those top five. Again, very service-oriented jobs that's where you were pre-COVID. And if we look at what changed over the last 10 years pre-COVID, financial activities, health services, professional technical services, accommodations, food service, all again, service-oriented industries. But again, those financial activities and professional technical, maybe pieces that can be done more remotely as well. So keep an eye on that. If those jobs, and this is jobs by location, not by jobs by resident, if these jobs can be done by somebody that lives in Kansas, could you potentially lose folks? Maybe. Something to keep an eye on and be aware of within the future. If we look at where Douglas County has been job growth wise, this shows kind of everybody in the Front Range equalized at at the 2005, so it's benched to 2005. The orange and the kind of blue lines that you see excelling are Adams and Douglas. And so we can see right up until about 2017, 2018, both you and Adams were on that same trajectory in terms of job growth, with then Adams taking off a little bit more out into the future, out in recently, but both Adams and Douglas losing in the recession. A couple of other things that you can see is, like, for example, Denver. Denver struggled. And we can see that Denver definitely has a hard time and has had a harder time during this recession. If we look at just that 19 to 20 decline, statewide about 6% job loss, about 6%. Adams only 2%, Douglas 3.1%. But you can look at Denver coming in at that 8.2, so definitely leading the way in terms of job loss. Why do I bring this up? Because a lot of your guys, I don't know if you remember looking at that commuting piece, a lot of your guys work in Denver. So it's important to know that Denver can be a drag on your system, but also a benefit to your system. So keep an eye on Denver, and Denver's been a little rough. Where have we seen recovery within the state? Interestingly, non-metro Colorado's doing better. So at the far left-hand side, we can see the job loss, and then the orange is kind of on that recovery side. If we look at the non-metro, 90% recovered, which is interesting and different than what I think a lot of people thought about. I think a lot of people thought about, well, what did this do to our tourism industry? What did COVID do? Well, a lot of outdoor rec is outdoors, right? And so actually a lot of our rural resort and a lot of our outdoor activity areas did fine during this time frame. It's really that highly concentrated indoor convention travel that have suffered the most. If we go down to the right, we can see that Colorado Springs MSA is second in terms of recovery, so 83% recovered, which is actually bodes well for Douglas County in terms of that influence on that side. Then we've got Fort Collins in there next, but then the Denver metro area, which includes Douglas County, only at 72%. On that far right side, 36% for Greeley MSA. So for Weld County is definitely suffering. A lot of this has to do with oil and gas. This chart shows this change. So the blue really shows that April 20 or the January to April 20, and that job loss. We lost about 376,000 jobs, but then quickly between April and June of 21 gained back 276,000 of those jobs, down still about 100,000, but we are doing gangbusters. We've been gaining back our jobs at about 80 to 90,000 a month recently, the last 2 months. So we could be fully recovered by the end of this year, easily, which is interesting to think about. Most areas are recovering except for local government. And then we've got information, state government, and mining that are still losing jobs. So some areas to keep an eye on. If we look at it in aggregate, 4 industries are above their pre-recession peak levels already. So transportation, warehousing, professional technical services, management of companies, and federal government are all above pre-recession or pre-COVID levels. 13 industries are still down, and 4 are about neutral. So again, that accommodations, food service, local government, state government really leading the way on that declines or where they haven't gained back yet. How are we doing compared to the United States as a whole? We're doing a little bit better now. We are about 73 or 74% recovered compared to the U.S. as a whole being about 70% recovered. So now changing wheels and looking at aging, because aging is actually one of the most important things I think for Douglas County to be thinking about. Primarily because it changes preferences, changes expenditure patterns, changes demands, changes service demands, changes incomes, because a lot of people age into the non-workers, from a worker to a non-worker. This is Colorado's age distribution broken down by single year of age. The black is 2020. is 65. This is for the year 2020. It's broken down by generation. What we can see for Colorado is our peak person's 29 years old. So in terms of births in the future, I told you one thing, that we're seeing an increase in births for the 30 plus. So we could actually start to see a rebound in births simply because we're aging more people into the 30 plus age group. So this could change pieces. It's not, so many people were like, yeah, no, we're going to have all of these births due to COVID. Everybody's going to be at home together. I'm like, yeah, everybody's at home together. Way too much quality time together. And we did not see any rebound. We watched this monthly. There has been no uptick in births. Could we see it in the next couple? Yeah. I've got in my office, we've got about 85 people, and about 12 of them are pregnant. All why? Because they can work from home. So it was a child care concern about how do you do the commute, how do you deal with it. With both mom and dad at home, they can switch off and do a lot more daycare potential. So we may see actually more of a bump as people figure out what COVID's going to mean. What else do we see from here? We can see on this far left-hand side that slowdown in kiddos, for sure. Now, this is Douglas County. Your peak person is 50 years old. Like I said, everybody that was in the Gen X wanted to be here, and they are. So you've got your peak at 50 and 16. God help you. All of those new drivers have so much fun. Seriously, have a good time. What do you also see on that far left side? Huge slowdown. So you could be seeing in certain parts of your counties school districts that are really declining, especially in that younger population. Now, I know as a whole, some areas are saying, no, we need more schools. Yeah, some areas are going to need new schools because that's where maybe new development has been that brings in younger families with kids. But then other areas that have been developed for a while may be slowing down. So we know that this is a situation that you guys are faced with. But definitely an interesting piece. And the other piece to look at is that you really do have a large number of people aging into that 65 plus. That black line is at 65. You've got a lot of people aging into that 65 plus over the next decade, 2 decades. And that's normal. Just be ready because it will be different. So like emergency services, people fall. God, my mother falls. This will happen. You need to be ready for it because it will impact what goes on in your community. So where is Douglas different than Colorado? Definitely Douglas has more 50 to 60-year-olds than the state average and fewer 20-somethings than the state average. So that's kind of a way to think about it, but really looking at the 65 plus currently about the same as the state average, but you've got that big group going to be aging in. And why does this matter? We're weird, and Douglas County is weird with this. You're also one of our youngest counties. And you're like, yeah, but you're talking about us aging. Well, did you see all those 16-year-olds? So you've got to balance these 16 and these 50s. And so that makes you actually pretty young. And we're a young state as well, but we're our 4th fastest aging in the country, and that's 65 plus. We're going to increase those 65 plus from that 850,000 to 1.2 million just by 2030. Huge economic driver. What was our fastest growing industries? Health services and accommodation food service. That will continue to grow as well as other demands for that 65 plus. Huge impact on occupational mix. Huge impact on wage rates in terms of demand at those different levels because a lot of those jobs are lower wage jobs. Are we creating housing for all of those folks as well? Huge impact on the labor force. Is the labor force a little tight right now? Is anybody here having a hard time hiring? It's just going to get worse. We've got about 1 million people aging out of the labor force over the next 10 years. Did you hear that? We think it's tight now, just wait. So thinking about how do we manage this, how do we look at keeping older adults in the labor force longer? Huge strategy. How do we get the younger folks to get in sooner? Huge strategy. Interesting. What was the fastest growing labor force age group during COVID? You're going to be surprised. Kara probably knows. No. Teens. Teens were the fastest growing increase in the labor force. Why? Because they weren't in school. No, that is part of it. They weren't in school. They also, who's got a teen? Do they care about their health? Right. So they weren't worried about going to work, and there were a ton of opportunities, and firms were hiring anybody that could walk. Right? So you can train a 16-year-old. Interesting to see that huge increase in the labor force participation. But it's an important piece for us to look at. Housing, important to look at. A lot of your housing units, you saw, when did you guys have a lot of growth? In the 90s. How old now are a lot of your housing units? Were they built with accommodations in mind? Like levers versus handles, stairs versus flat, zero entry. So definitely Douglas County is in that group that could have a huge demand for retrofitting housing units to make them more accommodating for older adults. So be aware of that implication as well. Huge impact on incomes, health, disabilities, transportation, public finance. Where do older adults spend their dollars? Services. What do we tax? Goods. What does Douglas County and Castle Rock love? Sales tax. This could have an impact on sales tax as well, so thinking about those implications as we age. So what are we forecasting for Colorado over the next decade? Fastest growth in the 65 plus again. So not only in percentage change, about a 40% increase, but in absolute numbers, over 300,000 in our 65 plus, compared to our bread and butter only increasing by 248,000. Our real bread and butter are actually our 45 to 64-year-olds, because they're the highest earning, highest spending, highest property tax paying age group. And they are one of our slowest growths, only at 6.9%. But look at our kiddos. Only a forecast increase of about 23,000 in the state. Again, simply due to this slowdown in births. What are we forecasting for Douglas County? Very, very similar. We're seeing an increase in that 65 plus being the fastest growing, and over half of the growth over this next decade forecast to be in that 65 plus. Your second group, again, being that kind of that bread and butter of the 25 to 44, but absolute declines in that under 24 age groups, simply due to that slowdown in births and our aging. And so a lot of times people will look at this and they'll say, really, I thought you said people don't move in at the 65 plus. Where are they all coming from? You having birthdays. Okay, they're not moving in. It's you aging in place that's going to be creating that growth in that 65 plus. Do you need to really worry about your working age population? Not yet. This is showing the change in working age population, that 16 to 64 over this next 10 years. All of the grayed out counties are experiencing an absolute decline in the working age population. All of the shades of brown, we're expecting an increase. So Douglas still expecting an increase, but again, be aware, for example, Jefferson County, absolute decline in working age population. Could they be trying to take more of your workers? Absolutely. So just keep an eye on those pieces as well. So lots of implications from aging, and I think I've already hit most of these pieces. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that one. Last piece I'm going to talk about is race and ethnicity. This looks at Colorado's race and ethnic makeup. From an age distribution point of view, which is on the graph, on the far left-hand side, looking at single year of age. A couple of things that you can take away from this is that we're definitely more diverse at our youngest age groups. If we look in absolute numbers and we look at total share, that's what the pie chart shows. About 70%, we'll get new numbers today that will indicate whether or not this is close to reality. But that gives you an idea of where we are. Why does this matter? Okay, so Douglas County, and it's no shocker to anyone, less diverse than the state average. Aging, needing probably young adults in the future. Our young adults are more racially and ethnically diverse. So we need to be looking at ways to attract diverse younger adults. Keep that in mind as we're looking at things. Certainly, for example, like financial services, and I've used this example several times, approached our office, I'm going to say maybe 2 years ago, and it's like 3 different entities, all in the same year. We're like, all right, Elizabeth, how do we attract diverse workers? And this was back when we could meet in person. And I'm like, I don't know if you can see me, but I am a white woman. I am not going to be the best person to tell you how to attract a diverse audience. You need to create a diverse audience or a diverse workforce to then attract others. So find those folks that are diverse to attract more, or ask them what it takes. It's not going to be me being able to tell you how to attract. But point is, we've got a tight labor force. You're going to need young workers. Most of our young workers are more diverse. So we need to be looking at that component. Then this kind of shows that share, really looking at, over 40% of our children, and if we look at really even under the age of 24, almost 40% are people of color compared to our older population that is less diverse. So this is showing the share of people of color. The other challenge that we have is that we still have a huge educational attainment gap within our population by age and race and ethnicity. There's about a 30-point differential in educational attainment between white, non-Hispanic, and Hispanic. Hispanic is our largest race ethnic group except for the white. And so one of our biggest concerns should be qualified workforce. So bringing that piece into the picture as well. And not only just for equity components, just for realistic. As your income, as your educational attainment increases, typically your income increases. As your income increases, your ability to spend increases. So our economy is driven 70% by consumer expenditure. So this is important just even for longevity, that we've got people that can spend and buy our homes so that we can keep everything churning. So this is an important piece for Colorado. Colorado has the second largest attainment gap in the United States. Colorado could easily have a large challenge attracting and retaining a qualified workforce unless we do something about it. And this, I had mentioned at the very beginning, higher ed is really looking at how do they diversify their base. So not just looking at the traditional college-age student, because that's declining, but how do they hit everyone? And I think that this is a great strategy for looking at how do we increase educational attainment for everyone across the board and look at non-traditional components. And I know that Douglas County has been building that educational attainment component as well. And that's something I think that you guys all can leverage and potentially attract more people to Douglas County as well because of that educational attainment component. So what do we think that the impacts from coronavirus are? We've got, again, these two dichotomies. In the short run, we expect actually a pretty big bounce back. And between now and the end of the year, if not into the first half of next year as well. We expect to recover all of the jobs that we lost. We know that there's been a huge impact from stimulus and how that's impacted spending, and that's going to start to trickle away into next year. So leverage what you see going on now, but know that it will not last forever, especially on the personal stimulus dollars that are going to be there. Now, if we get some of the infrastructure, that might be a different component. However, long run, bursts even slower. We have not seen any boom yet. Deaths, we will see higher initially because of COVID, but then back to the traditional pattern. I think the biggest question for all of us are, what's going to happen with migration? What are people going to do? Certainly, I think we're still going to get in-migration from our traditional partners like California, Florida, Texas, New York, higher cost areas. We will get our traditional in-migration from. But I've already heard from people that are saying, you know what, I'm cashing out. This is the best time to cash out in Colorado, and they're taking those dollars and they're moving out of state. That is something for us to be aware of and be concerned about. How do we continue to attract and retain the best and the brightest? Interestingly, international migration has plummeted. Not interestingly, right? I mean, borders were closed. Not just our southern border that I'm talking about. I'm talking about all borders. We get actually our largest immigration group from Asia into Colorado, and a lot of those borders closed. So 22% of Colorado's net migration came internationally, and that fell to about 0 for the last 2, now almost, going on to its second part of the year. So that's something that we're not sure about. Teleworking. This could be an interesting piece for Castle Rock and for Douglas County. It could make you even more attractive. People can just not have to worry. I'm sure a lot of people are like, I don't know if I want to drive from Castle Rock. No, now they don't have to. So this could be a positive for Douglas County and Castle Rock, and certainly would help maintain a lot of pieces. A lot of people are talking about this for rural Colorado as well. Who knows? The balance has always continued to be, is there housing? Is there childcare? Is there health care? And unless we can do something about the entire package, it's really hard to make any kind of rural Colorado especially fit into that picture, let alone broadband access. And, we know that this is going to put some downward pressure, COVID is, on job growth, especially in that accommodations food service area, which is still sorely behind. What is our forecast? Slow right now, booming back through about 2025, and then slowing out into the future. I think that really is uncertain, that area where there's a circle that's really driven by retirements. I think the biggest question is, can Colorado attract and retain? Can we attract new workers to Colorado, considering our cost of living? We're 5th highest median home value in the country. Can we continue to attract and retain? I think it's a big concern. Not like we've had in the past where we've always been able to attract and retain. I think that Colorado's at that, is it worth it? And especially when I-70 is closed. And especially when there's so much traffic going up I-70. I think our, what we thought of as our competitive advantage is questionable. Although any of you guys from East Coast or West Coast, I'll say this, I will complain about Colorado. I'm a native Coloradoan. Somebody from the coast come here and they see our traffic and they're like, what traffic? Right? So it's all relative. Forecast, I know this is a boring line, but this is the best I could do with one number, or one line going forward. So this is our forecast for Douglas County as a whole. This the solid line is where we are currently. The dashed is what we're forecasting into the future. So continued growth, but if you can tell in that shape, it's at a slowing rate out into the future. We work with the county and water suppliers to see if that is realistic. So far, they tell me it is. I don't know, getting up there close to that 475,000 out by 2050. So this is the last thing that I wanted to talk about, is really our forecast for the state. So this is a slowing number. I don't know if anybody remembers watching things historically, but back in 2007, 2008, our 2050 forecast for the state was 9 million. And we're down to 7.9 million now. So we're down by about 1.1. I bet when we finish our forecast for this year, which we're starting right now, that will end up being closer to 7.5 million instead of 7.9. But big picture, most of the growth along the Front Range. Of that 2.1 currently forecast, about 1.7 of it in the Front Range. Denver Metro, about 800,000 of it. The piece that I want you guys to be aware of is our two fastest growing or largest growing counties are going to end up right now are Weld and El Paso. So either way, I think you're impacted by what goes on, and especially that growth in El Paso County, where the jobs could be here or the jobs could be in El Paso, and Douglas is a right close by area. So being aware of that, and so it's probably good that that highway work is going on between here and El Paso. So big picture, you will see growth these next couple of years, but no long run that's forecast to slow. Primarily due to these things that there's nothing we can do about. Once you don't have a kid, guess what? They don't exist. It takes a good 20 years to create a good one. You know, I mean, it's not like a building or a car or a vehicle that you can go and just make a new one and then it's ready. This slowdown in births is for it right now. This is a long-term impact that there's nothing that we can do about except international migration. And we don't have one of those yet for the country as well. Policy, that is. So we've got this slowing. Migration has been slowing as well. It's harder and harder to attract the best and the brightest. Our labor force supply is slowing. So we need to look at strategies of how do we increase that labor force participation rate. So if our labor force isn't growing, the best thing that we can do is try and increase the numbers for those that have the lowest rates, being the youngest and the oldest. So looking at strategies to keep people in and to get people into the labor force. Aging, again, I think number one issue for Douglas County, you have not been old. So you're going to get that there over these next couple of decades, and you need to be ready for it. You've been used to being super young. And aging is not bad, believe me. I can do more now than I could when I was younger, but I mean, in terms of money. No, I cannot run as fast at all. But take this into account in terms of where you're going to be going. And we are becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. And I say this to areas that aren't as diverse. We need to look at how do we become more diverse. And typically like attracts like. And it's really hard to attract a diverse population when you're not diverse. So I'm just tossing that in terms of thinking about strategies out into the future. Lots of risks to this forecast. I think, God, this stupid pandemic. Lots of still uncertainty with that. Housing supply, like I said, we've got the 5th highest median home value. International migration, huge uncertainty. Water, still a huge uncertainty. Infrastructure, transportation, you can see all of these pieces. So there's lots of risks to this forecast, but hopefully what I've talked about is what influences it. So therefore you can keep an eye of what's going on. So with that done, see if there's maybe any questions. And if you don't, that's cool too. Anything I missed? Or
I'm sorry. When we talk about growing a 20-year-old into a worker, how much do you think the labor contraction, declining birth rates is going to advance automation, which is something that I'm seeing more and more throughout? Instead of 15 workers, you have 2 that are mainly working in technology, factory, robots, things of that nature. What's your forecast do to account for those changing dynamics, and how, if you don't have a worker, you have to find a solution, and oftentimes that can be an automated solution. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. No, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think we're going to see a lot more automation. And that COVID has really pushed it. We were going to see it anyway due to the aging of our population and the slowdown in the labor force. Definitely think that automation is going to be a big piece. That's where I also think education is so important and comes into the picture, because I think it's going to require potentially fewer workers, but more skilled workers, and reskilling workers. So there's still a lot of 30-year-olds and even 40-year-olds and maybe 50-year-olds that aren't skilled enough in certain areas to leverage that automation. And so that's where, again, I think that higher ed, in the broadest sense of higher ed, has an opportunity to broaden the breadth of their constituents by helping move us into that automation. But absolutely think that that's going to be a big piece. And that firms are going to prefer that. I mean, a machine doesn't talk back to you as much. Not that your employees would ever do that.
Somewhat related question, but kind of different. What effects of advancing technology were taken into the workforce? Stuff like Zoom meetings, video conferencing, all the technology that we really started to appreciate and experience during COVID. How does that affect some of the migration trends? And also, kind of combined with that, we got such a high cost of living now and high cost of housing, particularly in the Front Range in this metro area. It's been interesting to see some of the outlying areas outside around Denver really start to pop for housing, particularly around the I-76 corridor and I-70 corridor. So the question is, technology being able to either keep people in place in existing areas or allow them to escape outside to lower cost areas of living. Is there anything in your demographic, your forecast, that you could talk about regarding that and the technology impact?
Right. No, I wish I knew what the answer was. I think that is, the whatever $24 million question or whatever. I don't think we know yet what that shakeout will be. I just know that you need to be ready for something different. And that difference could be good, or that difference could be bad. I definitely think Colorado is at risk because of our high cost, but high cost relative to what? If you're coming from any of the coasts, Colorado is not necessarily as high a cost. I think that we just need to work on being able to leverage that technology. And I think that there's a lot of ways that we can do it. And certainly, like for parts of rural Colorado, where it was really difficult for both partners to get a job or find a job, this can make that so much easier. Somebody's got a job in that area and the other one telecommutes or doesn't even have to commute. They just are 100% online. So I think it does broaden the opportunities for a lot of families that they didn't have before. And so I think this can be beneficial, especially for rural parts of the state and of the country. But I think that also puts us at risk. I think we can easily see us losing people too, that maybe didn't like Colorado to begin with, or didn't like the size, or didn't, that maybe the smaller communities. It was fun. I was on a conference call yesterday from Zonda and housing markets, and they were talking about all of these places now in the Midwest that are actually popping because lower cost, small, cute communities, definitely lower housing prices, and their job can be anywhere. So I think that it can be a benefit and a drawback, and we need to figure out where we're going to be. I think, and nobody knows 100% what that online is going to be. There's, huge demand in people that want to be back in the office, huge demand for people that want to be 100% online, and huge demand for people that want a hybrid. Well, I need to see how that plays out and how companies play that out into the future. But I think the biggest piece is that the worker actually has more power now than they ever have. And so that's, I think, going to be the interesting piece.
We've had some discussions in our office with some companies and on that topic that the last gentleman brought up. And what they're seeing is competition with Amazon and bigger firms where they can live wherever they want to. And now before, if you lived in Fargo, you could only make $14 an hour working in a call center. Now you can go, I can make $27 an hour working for Amazon because they're based out of New York, right? So I'm getting a New York salary boost, but I am living in Whitefish, Montana, and so they're seeing that a lot. And I now, to your other comment, you're also seeing the regionalization of salaries is now becoming kind of a nationalization of salaries. And so I find it really interesting talking to these companies, and we now know two couples that exactly what you said. One of them works, and one of them continues to draw their Colorado salary, and they live in Whitefish, Montana. So, and she's one of the better paid people in town because the Montana salary local market's not holding any jobs for her, and so she can keep her job here, remote work, and have a great lifestyle up where they're living. So I'm seeing more and more of that. To your comment.
So I was totally instructed to make sure I acknowledge the folks online. So hello, folks online. Are there any questions from the folks online? Super. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for having me here today. If there's ever any questions that come up, any pieces of data that you're interested in, I want to just toss ideas out. There's our contact information. And again, thank you so much for the invitation to Castle Rock, because you guys are changing all the time. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.